people need to know that God still does miracles, not just across the ocean or back in the Bible. Like, he does miracles today in our own backyard. And if you ever have the absolute pleasure of meeting a teenage mom, the best way to connect with her right off the bat is just ask her little one's name and then tell her how cute that name is, and she will open up and start to respond to you.
So today, the tough topic is teen pregnancy. It happens. And I think the testimony of our guest, along with how she has turned that pain into passion and what she does now to help teen moms, is incredible. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking forward to sharing that with everybody. And also how this is an example of, what about me, Lord? I mean, stepping up from obscurity. You're just a person waking up every day, doing the day-to-day things, and then you make yourself available to the Lord. Mm-hmm. And he says, you don't even know what I'm going to do with you, but here we go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Lisa Stephen was a teen mom, and she's spent the past 25 years or so supporting women through Hope House, which is a residential facility for young moms here in Colorado.
Lisa, it is great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you guys today.
You know, I want to start with something that was heart-wrenching as I read through the material, read the book. And when you were a young child, you said, God didn't live at our house. Whew. As a parent, I mean, that brings me to tears just thinking that my child would even feel that. Mm-hmm. But many of us kids, I grew up in a similar household. And I guess it gripped me because I thought to myself, that's something I could have said for myself, but I never put it in that context. Tell us what you meant by that and why you said that.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, yes, I grew up in a household that was, I described it as often walking on eggshells. Everybody was just sort of waiting for a big fight to happen between my parents. My dad was an alcoholic and sort of worked sometimes and didn't work sometimes. And so there was just a lot of tension in our household, a lot of fights between my parents. And so it was very chaotic. But when we would go visit my grandma and she would take us to church, she went to this little Lutheran church in Colorado Springs, and she would take us to church, and everything was so orderly. Like, everything happened in an order in the service. It was so peaceful. And I thought, wow, God must live at my grandma's church. And I really wish God would come live at my house and make it peaceful and orderly and not chaotic. So I just, as a 6-year-old kiddo, thought God only lived in certain places where there were peace and order.
You know, I think that's exactly why Jesus said, don't get in the way of kids coming to me. Because children have a way of feeling it, of expressing it, oftentimes with greater clarity than adults.
Yeah.
Like, the older we get, the more obscure it gets for us. But a child saying, yeah, God doesn't live at my house. It meant the presence of the Lord was not in your home.
Right.
That's a good definition of being far away from God, right?
Yep.
You are the teen mom. Let's get into that. I appreciate that vulnerability. You know, I can remember being in high school, and I knew friends that were in that situation. Yeah. Obviously, it takes two.
Right.
And we're not ignoring the boy or the man's role in this. We get that. But let's talk about that teen girl, which you were, who feels isolated, separated, desperate, maybe especially in your home. It created greater dysfunction now. I mean, so describe the setting. How old were you? What was happening in your life?
Well, so my parents divorced when I was 13, which was a good thing. I was not that kid that wanted their parents to get back together because they needed to not be together. And so I lived primarily with my mom. We didn't see our dad a lot. And by the time I was sophomore, I think I was a sophomore in high school when I met John, my boyfriend, and now husband for the almost last 40 years. We met cruising the mall. There was a mall in Westminster called Westminster Mall, and it was square. And all the kids would like drive around the mall in opposite circles. And if you liked someone, you'd wave at them and tell them to pull over. And so here I am in this giant sea green Buick with my friend Liz. We would beg her mom to let us borrow this car, and we were not cool, let me just say.
But being not cool was kind of cool.
Maybe. But a very cool car went by the other direction. My soon-to-be boyfriend had a 1974 Chevy Nova that was rust-colored and souped up and pushed up in the back, and it just roared, and it drove by, and we waved, and I'm, elbowing my friend Liz and saying, if they stop, I get to talk to the driver, because she always got the cute boys. And so
You guys are making a deal
yeah,
here.
we're making a deal. So they pulled over, much to my surprise, and I met John, and he was kind and sweet, and we started dating, and he took me to meet his family, and his family home was so very different from mine. It was they ate dinner together as a family. His mom had a kidney disease and required dialysis, and she did dialysis at home. And his father would do the dialysis. He would, put the needle in and start the machine, and they would sit together, and he cared for her.
Wow.
And she cared for her family so well, and introduced me to the Lord in a different way than I had known the Lord before. And so just being in their home was like, this is what I want. This is what I think family is supposed to look like.
It's like your grandma's house.
It was like my grandma's house.
Interesting.
And so I joke to John that I married him for his family. But we, a year, actually almost to the date, a year later after meeting one another, we're sitting in that same Chevy Nova outside of a clinic, having just gotten the test results that we were pregnant. We were 17 years old. And John's response, to his credit, was to turn to look at me in the seat of the car and say, well, what are you doing 2 weeks from Friday? And that was my marriage proposal.
Yeah.
And so we, of course, had to then go home and tell our parents that we were pregnant, and I wasn't too worried about telling mine.
I want to get into that because we've had people on the program talk about that experience, both from a parent side and the teen girl's side.
Right.
I mean, how did that go when you went and told your mom, and then you must have had a separate discussion with your dad?
Yep, exactly. Separate conversations. I think primarily with my parents, I didn't have much of a relationship with either one of them by that point. I did a lot of caring for my younger siblings and lived pretty independently from them. My mom worked all the time because my dad didn't pay child support. Not that I wanted to tell her this, but she wasn't terribly, I don't know if I would say interested, but she wasn't terribly interested. And so really the big deal was telling his parents, because I did not want them to be disappointed in me. I respected them and looked up to them, and I didn't want them to be disappointed in John. So telling them was much harder. And my soon-to-be husband, in his infinite 17-year-old wisdom, decided that we should tell them while my future mother-in-law, was doing dialysis. So we're standing there in the basement of their home, watching a movie, and she's doing dialysis, and her blood's going through a machine next to her. I'm like, can this kill her if we tell her this news? I will say that their reaction was probably the single greatest act of parenting that I had experienced to date. They could have been, and maybe were, but they didn't express it to us, angry or shouting or super sad, super disappointed. I'm sure later there were probably tears and conversation. It's not something any parent really wants for their child, but their response was to say, all right, let's sit down and have a conversation about this. Let's talk about what marriage looks like. Let's talk about what raising kids looks like. They imparted a lot of wisdom in a short period of time.
Can I ask you a question in that description? A bit tender, but abortion. You're not coming from a Christian home. What gave you the sense that there's really only two options? I do this alone, or I get married to John and we do it together? I never had the thought that I would do it alone. John was he was an incredible young man, and he's an incredible grown man now. So there was never a moment where I thought that I would be doing it alone. There was also never a moment when I thought we would be considering abortion. The word was never even stated. That's amazing, given how young women today are facing those choices.
Yeah, and his parents' reaction was an immediate, let's talk about what being married looks like, and not in a judgmental way like shotgun marriage, like you two have to go get married. But supportive.
Yeah.
They'd been married for many, many years at that point and just imparted some wisdom on what this is going to look like.
In the book you talk about situational poverty and generational poverty, the distinction between those two. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, so situational poverty, essentially we were a middle-class family with middle-class background, even though my dad had a situation, alcoholism, that caused us to be in poverty a lot of the times. what I mean by middle class values, we still valued education. We value in the middle class, we value saving money. We value getting an education and completing further education and having a career, eventually owning a home, and at some point in your life retiring. When you grow up in generational poverty, which is about 95% of the moms we work with, their value system is different than that. They've never experienced family members typically not even graduating from high school, certainly not graduating from college. They've often experienced domestic violence and abuse in their homes. Almost all of our moms have experienced some form of abuse, whether that's physical abuse or emotional abuse or sexual abuse. Unfortunately, their homes are, like mine, highly chaotic, but it's a given that highly chaotic is the norm. And it's been the norm for generations, where in my family, we knew it was not the norm. Our grandparents hadn't lived that way.
And you had that illustration of
Right.
your grandparents, that
Right.
example.
We had modeling.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
It's huge. It's one of the primary things we do at Hope House is model for our mamas what it looks like to live a healthy, stable life in connection with God. They've never experienced that. It's really hard to do something you've never seen done. Small example, if you've never been read to as a child and you have no idea that reading to your children will help them to prepare for school, you just don't read to them. And as soon as we let them know that reading to their children helps them, they're like, where do I get books? Because they've never been inside of a library.
Wow.
They don't even know how to get books.
Yeah. Just so much of that poverty description, it locks people in because they don't know an exit ramp.
Right.
Until they're shown or taught or encouraged.
That's exactly
which
it.
they typically don't have people in their lives that do any of that.
Yeah.
So that idea of being able to ramp off of poverty and into a better direction, that's something Hope House is doing all the time.
Yep.
And it's exciting.
Our guest today on Focus on the Family with Jim Daly is Lisa Stephen, and we're really enjoying the conversation with her about her story, and that's captured in the book, A Place to Belong, the true story of a teen mom, a humbling leadership journey, and a house called Hope. Thank you for joining us, and if you find this content meaningful, hit that subscribe button so we can keep growing and improving together.
Lisa, Hope House, to dig a little deeper there, it had a very difficult start.
Yeah.
You mentioned the book, someone named Tracy.
Yeah.
So tell us that story and then the origin of Hope House.
Yeah. So my involvement in MOPS, my experience in MOPS led to me being a part of Teen MOPS, which at the time was groups that MOPS had started for teenage mothers. We started I think it was the second Teen MOPS group at Arvada Covenant Church. And one of the young ladies who attended that group, Tracy, was just so dear. She had twin one-year-old girls when she joined our MOPS group, and she came to a Bible study that we did on the off weeks. She ended up accepting Christ. Sadly, about a year into her time with us, she was killed by her boyfriend. She had tried to separate from him, and it did not go well, and he beat her to death, frankly, and it was a terrible thing for all of us, of course, her family, but honestly, she just had nowhere to go.
She had no relief.
She had no relief, and there were no resources for a young teen parent who already had children. So at that point in time in 1997-ish, we had several maternity homes in the Denver metro area where you could go if you were pregnant and trying to make a birth decision, but there was no home where you could go if you were a teenager with a child. And all of the transitional housing and shelters were for 18 years old and up, oftentimes 21 years old and up. So if you were 16, 17 years old and had a child, there was literally no resource for you. And so many of our teen moms in the Teen MOPS group were coming to us asking us for, hey, can I stay at your house? And one of our leadership members tried that. It was not a great idea. Teen moms are absolutely amazing, but they come with a lot of not amazing folks in their life that are around them. And it wasn't a great idea for one of them to move into one of our private homes. Didn't go well. And we just started looking for what's out there, what is available to these girls. And when we found that nothing was, someone in that leadership group had the idea, it wasn't me, that said, hey, we should open a home for teen moms. And I was like, well, that sounds super exciting. And I really wanted to be a part of it. And saying yes to God, being a part of this thing that he was calling into being was exhilarating and terrifying all at the same time. It meant setting aside my own plans for my life, and I knew that. And I think that's part of the point of the book is what can happen, and what you said in our introduction, like what can happen when you are willing to say yes to something that's too big for you, and then God gets to do it, and you get to go along and be a part of the adventure. It's pretty incredible.
And then with Hope House, the idea that it all goes well.
Yeah.
It's crazy, but it doesn't. And you have opportunities where God will show up to deliver a miracle.
So much.
Describe some of those things that you knew you were right where you needed to be because God showed up.
Yeah, so much. I often will look back, and because now we're in a different financial position than we were in for the many years that we were building Hope House. But when we first started Hope House, it was just a group of people who had a heart and a passion and not a background in doing this type of work. And we were offered the opportunity to move into a home that was at 69th and Sheridan. And the folks who owned the home were going to develop housing, their townhomes. They offered to give us the house with the provision that we pick it up and move it off their property so they could develop the property. Subsequently, a church, literally 4 blocks down and 1 block over, donated land for us to put the house on. So I marched down to the city with my program director at the time and go to the city planning office and ask them, how does one go about subdividing a piece of land from this church who's very generously going to donate this piece of property? And they just laughed at us and said, this is not going to happen. The folks who are doing their development have 2 months until they start digging. It's going to take you a whole year to rezone that property. And I just stood there and argued with God and said, really, God, you'd give us a house and land, but we can't put it together. And my sweet program director just says, can you just check what the zoning is? And we needed an RL zoning. So the planner rolls her eyes, goes back to this file cabinet in the back, pulls out this huge plat map. And right down in the corner was a big green stamp, RL. Well, it turns out that that church, 25 years prior, had zoned just that one little portion of their land for a maternity home, and then never put ministry on that land. So long before I was ever a teenage mom, God knew what he was going to do in my life. He knew what he was going to do with that land. He moved through a group of people at a church who, many of whom had passed on by that point. It's
they did do ministry
church.
With that land, didn't they? In the end,
Boy,
they did.
They sure did.
Thank the Lord they zoned it that way. That's
Thank
crazy.
The Lord. It's a miracle that still gives me goosebumps. And people need to know that God still does miracles, not just across the ocean or back in the Bible. Like, he does miracles today in our own backyard. And it's incredible to be a part of watching him do that. And that house, literally from the basement to the roof, once it was moved, was completed all through donation. I didn't even know what a capital campaign was at that point.
Yeah.
So
it's so sweet. It's so innocent the way you approach it. You were helping maybe dozens of girls at the time, but now you're helping 250 women a year.
Yeah, 280.
280?
Yeah, it's crazy. And about 340 kids this year.
Wow. And you have literally so many stories. I mean, you've captured so many in the book, but 1 or 2 stories that come to mind, Lisa, about what God has done through Hope House in the lives of the people you serve.
I just got off the phone with Alondra yesterday, one of our mamas who is an alumni. She's now in her early 30s and is moving to North Carolina. She came to us completely, truly homeless when she was 17 years old with a 1-year-old little boy and moved into our residential program. She had a big dream of being a nurse, which is a stretch when you're a single teenage mom, and going to nursing school is very difficult. She lived in the residential program for about a year. She came to know Christ while she was in the program, joined a church, earned her GED through Hope House, and we were able to help her move on to college. And it took about 6 years, but I got to sit in the auditorium as it was the pinning ceremony where nurses get pinned, and she had her then, at that point, 8-year-old son come across the stage to pin her nursing pin on her. And I talk about in the book how no single biological family member was there present at that ceremony, but an entire row full of Hope House family was there, jumping up and down and cheering and shouting for her when she got pinned. And I often say, what I hope that people can hear is that when you're so brave to say yes to God and then you get to experience what he does through that. It's incredible to see the fruits and to get to watch Alondra walk through across that stage. It was a celebration for her, and it was a celebration for me. It was a miracle.
I think it's so beautiful. And I think, we talk a lot about grace in the church and the Lord's love, and we use words like unconditional love. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we don't see it in terms of how we, his creation, express it, because it's hard to do.
Right.
And I think in this place of teen pregnancy, right from the parents through the friends, through the churches even, that struggle to express God's love for those people in trouble. What's the last word from you about that experience, which you had as a 17-year-old? What can we learn from all of that and what you do day to day at Hope House to make sure these women, and in some cases the boys or men that are part of it, feel the love of Christ, even though they're in a disaster?
Well, if you ever have the absolute pleasure of meeting a teenage mom, the best way to connect with her right off the bat is just ask her little one's name, and then tell her how cute that name is, and she will open up and start to respond to you. I often say, out there somewhere is a new teenage mom curled up with a baby in a place where she doesn't feel safe, and she doesn't know how to get out of the situation she's in. And right there next to her is God whispering in her ear, just hold on, I'm sending my people. And we are his people. And if we say yes and we go, great miracles can happen. And she can be changed and saved, and so can her little one.
I mean, that's the story. That's where the Lord moves and works and redeems and saves a life from disaster, right?
Yeah.
Which all of us could have been in that space. And your story's powerful, Lisa. Thank you for coming and sharing it with us and all the listeners and the viewers. It's really quite a story. It reminds me, John, we've done something called Truth Rising, which is a documentary, and it's the stories of ordinary people that woke up one day and all of a sudden they became extraordinary people because of what God was going to do with them. And you are living that, Lisa. You're like that person. You were the teen mom.
Yeah.
You didn't have the college degree. You had everything working against you, all the wind of this world pushing back. And yet the Lord said, no, she's the one. And you are doing extraordinary things.
Thank you.
Helping those women. So thank you. It gives me tears thinking about it, because lives are changed.
Yeah.
And those kids, their lives are changed.
Their lives are changed.
That's what it's all about. So get in touch with us. Get a copy of Lisa's book, A Place to Belong. It says it all. And support the ministry here at Focus. And maybe we could do more to partner with what you're doing there. I'd love to do that. And if you can make a gift of any amount to help marriages, to help moms, to help our Option Ultrasound Project, to get that baby born so that they can experience this life that God has given them.
Yeah, contact us today. Donate as you can. Request Lisa's book, A Place to Belong. And by the way, if you need to connect with a counselor, we've touched a tender spot for you. We have caring Christian counselors here to walk you through whatever you're going through. It's all provided by our generous donors, and you can be one of those when you contact us. We've got all the details in the program description below. And thanks for watching Focus on the Family with Jim Daly. I'm John Fuller, inviting you back next time as we once again help you and your family thrive in Christ.